She thought she could find me into silence. But when my stunt team showed up, everything changed. I'll never forget the sound. The roar of engines shaking the ground beneath our quiet little street. Neighbors pouring out of their houses, phones in hand, mouths hanging open. Some of them were grinning, some were shocked, and a few were already whispering, "Oh my God, Karen is going to lose her mind." She did. But let's back up, because this story didn't start with motorcycles and cheers. Silence. It started with a single envelope, thin and ordinary. Slipped into my mailbox like a snake curling under the door. Violation notice. That's what it said at the top. Bold and unforgiving. Didn't even use my name, just homeowner. Cold. Impersonal. Like I wasn't even a person. Just another number in their filing cabinet. And do you know what the violation was? 4. My front door? The color was too bold for community standards. That was it. A door. A door I had painted with my own hands. I was proud of the way it stood out against the cookie-cutter beige that lined our street. I laughed at first. How could they care so much about paint? But then another letter came, and another. Suddenly it wasn't just the door. It was the lawn, the fence, the trash bins. Things so trivial, you'd think they were running out of reasons to stay relevant. But the more letters I got, the heavier they felt. Not just in paper, but in weight, in control. Like every envelope was saying, "We own you." And behind every one of those letters was her, Karen, the queen bee of the HOA, clipboard in hand. Sunglasses perched on her face like a badge of authority. She patrolled the neighborhood like it was her personal kingdom. And if you so much as sneezed without her approval, you could bet a letter would show up the next day. For months, I played along. Trimmed the lawn when they complained, moved the bins when they threatened. I paid small fines just to keep the peace. But every time, something inside me burned hotter. It wasn't about grass or fences. It was about control. It's about someone deciding they could shrink me down to size with rules and fines. And I wasn't the only one. The single mom down the street got fined for her kids leaving their bikes on the lawn. An old veteran was told his flag was improperly displayed. An elderly couple got notices because their Christmas lights stayed up a week too long. Over and over, people bowed their heads, paid their fines, and stayed silent. Fear works that way. It eats at you slowly until you stop fighting. But not me. It's not anymore. The breaking point came on a hot afternoon. I was in my driveway, washing my truck, when Karen strutted over. Clipboard tucked under her arm, a smug smile plastered on her face. She tapped her pen against the hood of my truck and said, "You'll be getting another notice. This driveway washing violates water conservation guidelines." I stared at her, soap dripping down the side of my truck, hose in hand. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I thought, if they want a show, I'll give them one they'll never forget. That's when the idea was born. Not just to fight back, not just to resist, but to put on a spectacle so outrageous, so unforgettable, that the entire neighborhood would see the HOA for what it really was, a joke. So I made some calls, called in favors. Reached out to a group of friends who lived for stunts, for noise, for making an entrance. And when I told them what I wanted to do, they laughed, but then they said yes. The plan was simple. Turn my yard into a stage, my house, into a spotlight. And let the world watch as I flipped the script on Karen's reign of terror. The morning of the show, I woke up with nerves in my stomach. What if no one cared? What if the cops shut it down before it even started? But when the first motorcycle rolled up, engine growling, and then another, and another, and another, my fear melted into adrenaline. By the time the whole stunt team lined up in front of my house, the street was buzzing. Neighbors peeked out of blinds, some clutching coffee cups, others recording already. And then, with a signal, the engines roared to life. The sound was deafening. The air vibrated with energy. Tires squealed, smoke filled the street, and the synchronized moves of the stunt team turned my driveway into a theater of rebellion. It wasn't chaos. It was art. It was defiance. And then came Karen. She stormed out of her house like a hurricane in human form. clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, phone already in her hand. She screamed. She waved her arms. She shouted about violations, safety hazards, fines. But here's the thing. No one listened. For once, her words carried no weight. They were drowned out by the engines, by the laughter, by the cheers of neighbors who had finally seen someone stand up to her. And that's when I realized the HOA's power was never real. It was borrowed. Borrowed from our silence. Borrowed. From our fear. And the second we stopped believing in it, the whole illusion shattered. Even the cops showed up. 2 cruisers, lights flashing. Karen rushed over, waving her arms, pointing at me like she was presenting evidence in court. He's violating safety codes. He's endangering the neighborhood, she screeched. But do you know what happened? The officers looked at the scene, looked at her, and then one of them leaned toward me and whispered, "Man, this is the funniest thing I've seen all week." Karen's face turned redder than a stop sign. Her voice cracked as she realized the authority she worshipped wasn't backing her up. For the first time, she wasn't feared. She was ridiculed, and in that moment I knew I'd won. But here's the thing, this story isn't just about revenge. It's about resistance. It's about what happens when one person stands up and says, "No more." Because the real magic wasn't the stunt show itself. It was the ripple effect. After that day, people changed. As the single mom started pushing back. On her fines, the veteran proudly hung his flag even higher. The elderly couple put up lights in the middle of summer, just because they could. The neighborhood had woken up, and the fear was gone, and me. I didn't stop there, because the HOA wasn't going to just take this lying down. The very next morning, another letter showed up. But this one was different, bigger, thicker. They weren't just threatening fines anymore. They were threatening legal action. They said I was endangering community safety. They said my actions warranted serious disciplinary measures. They even underlined it like underlining words made them more powerful. And for a moment, just a moment, I felt that weight again. I'd whisper in the back of my head saying, maybe this is too big. Maybe you can't fight them. But then I looked outside. Neighbors were waving, smiling, some even giving me a thumbs up. And I realized I wasn't alone anymore. This wasn't just my fight. It was everyone's. So I doubled down. Every letter they sent I shared. Every threat I exposed. Let the world see the absurdity of it all. And the more light I shined, the weaker they became. And Karen, she was unraveling. She tried whispers, rumors, intimidation. She walked the streets at night, knocking on doors, trying to rally support, but people were done listening. She wasn't the queen anymore. She was the punchline. And I'll tell you this, the moment she realized she'd lost control, that's when things really started to spiral. Because when a bully loses power, they don't go quietly. They thrash, they claw, they drag everyone down with them. And that's exactly what Karen did. But that's a story for later. For now, I want you to think about something. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have paid the fines, kept your head down? Or would you have fought back, even if it meant putting everything on the line? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I want to hear from you. And don't go anywhere, because this story isn't over. Not even close. If you think the stunt show was the climax, you're wrong. That was just the spark. What came next was bigger, darker, and so unbelievable that even the HOA couldn't cover it up. Stick with me till the end, because you need to see how Karen went from handing me letters to having investigators knocking on her door. And trust me, you are going to want to see every second of how it unfolded. The morning after the stunt show, I woke up to a thud on my porch. Another letter. It's thicker than the others. Heavier, like it carried the weight of judgment itself. This time, it wasn't just a violation notice. It was a warning of further action, legal threats. Words like reckless, hazardous, property devaluation. They accused me of disturbing the peace, endangering the neighborhood, and bringing shame to the community. Shame, as if the real shame wasn't. The way they terrorized homeowners with clipboards and fines. I sat at my kitchen table. The letter spread out in front of me and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. A handful of people, hiding behind rules, thinking they could decide what was right, what was wrong, and who deserved to belong. But laughter only carried me so far, because as the sun rose higher, I felt it, the creeping shadow of doubt. What if they weren't bluffing this time? What if they really dragged me to court? What if this went beyond a fight and turned into something I couldn't control? That's when I heard the knock. I opened the door, and standing there was my neighbor, the single mom they had fined for her kids' bikes. She wasn't holding her. Head down like usual, she was holding a plate of cookies. And she said, "Thank you." Her voice cracked as she told me how, for the first time, she didn't feel powerless. Her kids saw the stunt show and cheered. They asked her if the bad lady was gone. She said no, but she told them that sometimes one person standing up makes everyone stronger. That's when I realized this fight wasn't mine anymore. It was ours, and the HOA knew it. Over the next week, letters multiplied. They weren't just addressed to me now, they hit everyone. Petty fines, new rules, sudden inspections. They were desperate, like a cornered animal lashing out. And Karen, she was everywhere, standing in the street with her phone, snapping pictures of people's yards, marching up to porches with that tight smile that never reached her eyes. But something was different now. People weren't shrinking back. They weren't apologizing. They were standing taller, talking louder. Some even tore up the notices right in front of her face, and Karen hated it. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with fire, she showed up at my door. No clipboard this time. No fake smile. Just fury. Her voice trembled with rage as she said, "You're destroying this neighborhood. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're nothing but a clown." Stared at her, calm, steady. And I said, "At least clowns make people laugh. What have you ever done but make people afraid?" Her eyes narrowed. She hissed something under her breath, something about lawyers, about making sure I regretted this. And she stormed off into the night. But here's the thing. Her words didn't scare me anymore. Not because I thought I was untouchable, but because I knew I wasn't standing alone. The very next day, the veteran down the street raised his flag higher than ever. Neighbors started gathering in my yard, bringing food, drinks, chairs. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a movement. And movements can't be fined into silence. That's when we decided to take it. Further, if they wanted to accuse us of disturbing the peace, we were going to show them what real peace looked like. We organized a block gathering. No engines. No stunts, just people, families, kids playing, music floating through the air, neighbors laughing like they hadn't in years. It wasn't rebellion. It was community. The very thing the HOA claimed to protect, but had destroyed. And when you know it, Karen showed up. Clipboard back in her hand, but shaking now. She shouted about permits, noise, unauthorized use of common spaces. She barked orders, but no one moved. No one cared. For once, she was just background noise. The cops showed up again, called by her for the third time that week. They looked around at families sharing food, kids riding bikes, people laughing together, and they shook their heads. One officer actually said, "Ma'am, this looks like a block party. Nothing illegal here." Karen's jaw dropped. Her clipboard nearly slipped from her hand, and in that moment something broke. Not an US in her. She realized she couldn't stop us, couldn't control us, couldn't fine us into silence anymore. But broken people are dangerous. That night, I caught her outside my fence, flashlight in hand, scribbling on her clipboard. She jumped when she saw me, muttered something about documenting violations, and hurried off. Well, but the way she looked at me, that wasn't authority. That was desperation. Days turned into weeks, and the tension grew heavier. The HOA board scrambled to regain control, sending out letters filled with threats and legal jargon. Fewer and fewer people paid attention. Some stopped opening them altogether. Others pinned them to their refrigerators like trophies, and Karen. She grew bolder, but also sloppier. She started yelling in public, arguing with neighbors in the middle of the street, spreading rumors that I was a criminal, that I was endangering children. But the more she spoke, the less anyone listened. Because once fear is gone, all that's left is the truth. And the truth was this. She wasn't a leader. She was a tyrant. And tyrants only rule when people bow. But just when I thought we had turned the tide, another letter arrived. This one wasn't from the HOA, it was from a law firm. They were suing me. My hands shook as I read the words. Reckless endangerment. Violation of community trust. Property damage liability. They wanted thousands of dollars in damages. They wanted to make an example out of me. For the first time in weeks, the weight pressed down again. I stared at the pages, wondering if I had gone too far, if I had led everyone into a battle we couldn't win. But then my phone buzzed. Messages flooded in from neighbors. We've got your back. Don't give up. We're with you. And suddenly, that weight didn't feel so heavy anymore. Because here's the truth. Lawsuits are just another kind of letter. Another kind of fear. And fear only works if you let it. So I didn't. I gathered every letter, every notice, every empty threat they had sent me. I stacked them higher than my kitchen table. I called a meeting. Not in secret, not in whispers. Right in the middle of the neighborhood, under the open sky, dozens showed up. Some nervous, some angry, some just curious. I held up the stack of papers and said, this is what control looks like. This is how they keep us silent. But look around you. Do you feel silent anymore? And the answer was no. People cheered. Some cried. Some shouted things they'd been holding in for years. It wasn't about me anymore. It was about all of us. And once people taste freedom, there's no going back. But the HOA wasn't going to let go easily. And neither was Karen. She didn't just want control. She needed it. And losing it was tearing her apart. And that's when things started to turn dark, because fighting with letters and fines was one thing. But Karen was about to cross a line that couldn't be undone. The night air was heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. I had just finished cleaning up after another neighborhood gathering when I heard I-10 engine idling outside my house. I looked through the blinds and saw Karen's car, parked across the street, headlights off, but the faint glow of her phone lit up her face. She wasn't there by accident. She was watching, waiting. I thought about ignoring it, about letting her sit in the shadows until she got tired. But a cold realization hit me. She wasn't just observing anymore. She was plotting. The lawsuit had already rattled me, but this was different. This wasn't about paper threats or legal jargon. This was personal. The next morning I woke to find my fence spray painted. Ugly words, jagged and angry, scrawled across the wood. Danger. Lawbreaker. Get out. My stomach turned, not because of the vandalism itself, but because I knew exactly who had done it, and she wanted me to know. I cleaned it up, but the damage went deeper than the paint. Neighbors whispered. Some grew scared again. They asked me if maybe it was time to back down. If maybe this wasn't worth it, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't have an answer. I sat in my garage that night, staring at the stunt bikes, the tools, the trophies, from years of daring shows. Symbols of freedom, of expression, and I thought about how easily fear strips people of that freedom. I thought about how Karen thrived on it, and I asked myself, was I willing to let her win? The answer came not from me, but from a knock at the door. It was the veteran down the street, the man with the flag who never said much. He stood there, weathered face lit by the porch light, and said, I've seen worse than her. I've fought people who wanted to take everything from us. You don't stop fighting because it's hard. You stop fighting when it's over, and it's not over. His words hit like steel. Wasn't giving me permission to give up. It was reminding me of who I was, so I didn't stop. The next day we doubled down. We organized a full neighborhood event, bigger than anything yet. Not just a gathering, not just food and music, but a statement. We built a stage in my yard, brought in lights, speakers, even a local band. It wasn't about stunts this time. It was about voices. People shared stories. Stories of being fined for flowers planted too close to the curb, for flags flown at the wrong angle, for siding that was slightly off color. Story chipped away at the illusion of order the HOA claimed to stand for, and as those stories poured out, so did something else, unity. But unity has a way of drawing fire, because in the middle of a woman's story about how she was fined for leaving a wheelchair ramp up too long, Karen stormed in. Not alone. This time, she had backup. 2 men from the HOA board, suits too tight for their anger. Eyes sharp with malice, they marched up to the stage, shouting over the microphone. "This is an unauthorized assembly. You're in violation of community rules." But the crowd didn't scatter. They didn't bow their heads. They roared back, booed, shouted. One man yelled, "We live here, not you." And for the first time, I saw something flicker in Karen's eyes. Fear, because fear only works when it's one way. And now it wasn't. The board threatened police. Again, but the cops never came. It'd been called too many times already, and they weren't interested in breaking up a community gathering. So the board left, faces red with fury, but Karen lingered. She stood at the edge of the crowd, seething, until finally she pointed at me and screamed, "You'll pay for this." And then she was gone. But her words weren't empty. The lawsuit moved forward. Court dates loomed. The HOA doubled their efforts, plastering the neighborhood with notices, trying to scare people back into submission. But something was different now. People didn't just ignore the notices. They fought back. Some wrote letters of their own, challenging the HOA's authority. Others pooled money to hire a lawyer not for themselves, but for me. For us, the tide had turned, but the storm wasn't over, because Karen wasn't done one night. Weeks later, as rain hammered the streets and thunder shook the sky, my security cameras caught something. A figure at my gate. Hood pulled low, flashlight in hand, scribbling, tugging at the latch. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random vandal. It was her. I stepped outside, rain soaking me to the bone, and shouted her name. She froze, caught in the act. And for the first time, the mask cracked. Her voice trembled as she yelled back, "You're ruining everything? This was supposed to be perfect. This was supposed to be safe." That's when I understood. This wasn't about power. Not really. This was about control born from fear. It's fear of change, fear of imperfection. It's fear of losing the little kingdom she thought she ruled. But fear isn't an excuse, and it isn't a crown. I told her, loud enough for the thunder to carry. My words, "You don't own us. You never did." She didn't respond, and she just ran, disappearing into the storm. The next morning, everything changed. Word spread fast. The board tried to cover it up, but the truth leaked out. Karen was under investigation. Multiple complaints had been filed. Evidence stacked against her. The HOA board fractured, some siding with her, others backing away to save themselves. And for the first time, the neighborhood felt free. The lawsuit dropped, the fines dismissed. The letters stopped. Karen disappeared from the streets. No more clipboards. No more furious knocks. No more shadowy cars parked across from my house. And yet even in her absence, the impact remained, because she thought she could find me into silence. She thought she could control us with fear. But all she really did was teach us something stronger, how to stand together. And when a community stands together, no one, not even the loudest tyrant with the sharpest pen, can break it. So here's my question to you. If this was your neighborhood, if this was your fight, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet? Or would you have stood up even when it meant standing alone at first? Because that's the thing. Change doesn't start with everyone. It starts with one. One voice, one stand, one choice to say enough. And maybe that's what this whole story is about. Not fines, not stunts. Not even Karen. It's about the moment you decide that silence isn't peace and that real peace comes from fighting what's right. So if you've watched this far, if you felt even a spark of this fight inside you, tell me in the comments what's your opinion? What would you have done in my place? Because this isn't just my story anymore. It's ours. And the more we share it, the louder it becomes.